Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to the Literally Nothing Matters podcast. We are going to get to this amazing conversation with Joanne Finkelstein. And whether you're a parent or you're not, I know that you are going to love this conversation. I don't have kids. I don't know if I'm going to have kids. And I absolutely devoured her book. It was so healing to me as someone who has some sexual trauma. Even if you don't, I think just like as a woman experiencing the world, you will find so many things to relate to and find the conversation very empowering. But I also wanted to remind you to get your tickets to our self-defense workshop on Sunday, April 6th at 10 a.m. at row 34 in Burlington. So New England listeners, come one, come all. We are so excited to meet you and talk to you IRL. And I don't know about you all, but oh my God, I feel as though the men, they've been acting up. They are acting a fool. Someone needs to put a leash on them, a muzzle on them, take away their podcast mics for the love of God. So I don't know about you, but I am like absolutely dying itching for some like female energy, some positive energy, some empowering energy. I'm ready to talk some shit. I'm ready to like learn how to kick some ass because I am one wrong look away from taking action, man. Let me tell you. Just kidding mostly. But head to the link either in the show notes or at our Instagram bio, or just search it on Eventbrite, Feminist Self Defense. If you don't have anyone to go with, don't feel like you have to like go with a big group. Just like shoot us a DM on Instagram, get a ticket by yourself. I'll set up a little spot next to us for you. And we just really can't wait to have some really positive, empowering conversations and meet you in real life. And I know the Feminist Self Defense name might sound like it's something that is like exclusive to women. It is not. If it was only exclusive to like cis women, how freaking boring would that be? So please come one, come all, mostly just like cis men. You're not included. Like, sorry, you have every other place. All right. We'll see you on Sunday, April 6th. Get those tickets. There's only a few spots because we want to make sure it's an intimate group. And we did recently actually lower the ticket price because we were able to get some sponsors, aka namely myself, my event business. But doesn't matter because those tickets are cheap and they're hot. I'll see you there. Enjoy the episode. Love you, mean it. Today's guest is a clinical psychologist and the author of Sexism and Sensibility, Raising Empowered, Resilient Girls in the Modern World. A graduate of Harvard University and Northwestern University, she now maintains a private clinical practice in Chicago, Illinois. Her insights have been highlighted in the New York Times, The Atlantic, Harvard Business Review, Oprah Daily, and CNN, among others. An expert blogger for Psychology Today, her writing has also appeared in The Washington Post, Ms. Magazine, I think, Your Teen, and other prominent publications. She serves on the advisory board for Stop Sexual Assault in Schools, advocating for safe and equitable educational environments. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Joanne Finkelstein.
I am so glad to be here.
I am so excited to chat with you. Like you saw, if you opened up that question document, I have so many thoughts about this book, and I find all these topics super interesting regardless, but I was kind of wondering, like, I don't have kids yet, and me and my husband have, been having these conversations about like, oh my gosh, this just feels so scary to jump into parenthood at a time like this. And actually reading this, while of course like triggers a lot of those fears, you made it seem so doable. So thank you for that.
My pleasure. That was the goal, right? Like, be aware of how hard it can be to be a girl in this world, in this culture. Yeah, especially these days. But also parents have more power than they realize.
Yeah.
To address the sexism and gender bias that just covers girls' landscape.
Definitely. And I loved that your focus, because I'm sure so many people might like look at any kind of book with these topics and be like, oh, this is just going to pressure me to be like the most perfect parent. Like moms, especially, I think have that pressure on them so hard anyways. But I loved that when you really get down to the bones of it, the approach and the emphasis is not on perfect parenting and getting it right 100% of the time. It's just about being curious, encouraging your kid to be curious, having these like tough, honest conversations, and just like taking that extra time and care.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is nice. I think it takes a lot of the pressure off. So let's talk a little bit about the double standards of raising boys versus girls, because I think there are so many like little interactions that parents might not even realize that they're having, or these double standards that they're imparting onto their kids without even realizing. So I'd love to hear some of like the common differences that you see in parenting styles for boys versus girls.
Absolutely. Yeah, even the most progressive parents, right? Even parents, hello me, who have written books about this stuff have unconscious biases, right? So we have to become more aware of how we're treating them differently. And so how do you do that if they're unconscious? Well, you read books like, Sexism and Sensibility.
Yeah.
And you just learn, right? And then you start paying attention. And parents often tell me when they start paying attention, they're shocked by what they're saying or doing, and the different ways that they treat their sons and their daughters, right? Mm-hmm. So I have to start with interrupting, because interrupting is a big one, right? That teaches girls kind of beyond their awareness that what they have to say and how they think is not important, right? There's a story in the book about a girl named Robin, who, I'll never forget. She was a patient of mine, and I'll never forget when she had this realization that her parents always had, as she put it, ears for my brothers and eyes for me. Mm. That she meant that they listened to and paid attention to her brothers, and they basically focused on her appearance and safety. Yeah. Right. And so she came in because she felt like she was uninteresting and inarticulate, and she was the super smart kid. So really paying attention to the interrupting we do is important, because research shows girls and women are interrupted far more than boys. And
yes.
Another one is language, right?
I loved the princess example in the book of like something that, and so much of this, you're not doing it with the intention of making your kid feel a certain way. You think that you're calling them by this endearing name, but I totally interrupted you. But do you mind talking about that and all the other language things you probably were about to bring up before I
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the princess one is a great one. It wasn't what I was thinking about, but I think it's a great example because, when you realize that kids' associations to princess is like damsel in distress, somebody who needs rescuing. When you call them princess, you're sort of slowly teaching them that that they're passive, that they don't have the power, that being pretty is really important. The language that I was getting at is even less sort of conscious than that, right? It's the idea that we use emotion-focused words with girls, like love and sad and excited. But with boys, we use achievement related language like proud, win, best, right? And so you're really putting them on these two very different paths when, of course, both of those things are important, right? Like having a sense of your feelings is really important, and it helps build stronger relationships. And having a sense of, your achievements helps build agency and independence. And both of those are important for all kids of all genders.
Yeah.
Romance is another one, right? We make romance the centerpiece of a girl's life and identity in a way that we really just don't for boys, right? Like we tease them about boys before they even know what a crush is. We treat marriage like a prize, right? As sort of proof that they're worthy.
Like the biggest prize.
Yes.
That like ultimate life checkpoint that you need to get to.
So think about it, right? Girls are dating and marrying boys who haven't spent years preoccupied with marriage, right? No wonder we see so much balance and inequality in relationships later, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's back up a little bit because I want to talk about, I love that as much as this book focuses on raising empowered girls and all of that, it also doesn't leave behind the whole piece of raising boys and where we get that wrong and how we're seeing that play out in today's culture. And so you just mentioned how it's important for boys to also learn how to feel their emotions, how to identify their emotions, to know that emotions are okay. And I want to read a quote from the book that like really, really stood out to me because it really showed how the system is failing all of us and why the masculinity isn't bad. We just need to let's pluck the good parts out from it. In the book, you said in 2018, the American Psychology Association published its first ever report on boys and men. He was recognizing that the rugged, stoic, self-sufficient ideal of masculinity could be damaging. The report showed those who conform to or experience pressure to embody the stereotype are more at risk of suicide, violence, drinking and driving, bullying, and being bullied. The last thing we want is boys being guilted for their gender and seeking a sense of belonging online among those who assure them that their maleness and whiteness make them extra special. Masculinity isn't toxic, but conforming to certain strands of masculinity can be. Toxic masculinity tells boys they're one misstep away from being a pussy or a pansy, so they must deny sadness, never admit doubt or need for help, be straight and always want sex, see women primarily as sex objects, use violence to dominate, and be intolerant of anyone who doesn't conform to these same norms. Like, this is what we're seeing with like incel culture and this rise of really horrible outlooks about women, which is only going to make the violence epidemic against women so much worse. So obviously this is a very loaded question, but what are some ways that we can like work into our everyday lives with our boys to make sure that we're raising them to be empathetic?
Yeah. Well, I think the best way to help them understand that a patriarchal culture hurts women is to show them that they suffer too, right? That they're expected to cut off a huge portion of their humanity in the name of being tough. Right? This whole sort of boy code inhibits them from being emotionally vulnerable and forming the deep connections that they might not even know that they long for.
Yeah.
So if we raise them to value relational qualities like caring, connection, cooperation, make them aspirational for boys, not emasculating, they won't fear femininity so much, right? Which is the real basis for sexism and also homophobia.
Yeah.
So I think the overarching goal is to practice egalitarian parenting, right? And building a good enough sexism detector in boys too, so that like denigrating all things feminine won't be this sort of acceptable sport. And they will be able to own the parts of them that long for connection. And I think it's really important. Like, it's very tricky to teach boys about structural privilege without shaming them, right?
Totally.
And male privilege is usually invisible to boys and men. But research shows that when they're made aware of it and the harmful effects that it has, sexist attitudes actually diminish. So it's like really worth the effort, right? And they may have no idea that girls grow up learning to be hyper vigilant and that if they're assaulted, they're blamed for being in the wrong place in the wrong clothes. While boys generally have the privilege of autonomy. So if you are like over time working these things into your conversation, using teachable moments, like I explain in the book, like they will come to see that equality and everybody being treated as whole human beings is better than
better for everybody. Yeah. I mean, I think that's what we're seeing right now with this like quote unquote male loneliness epidemic, where kind of like one of the examples that you give with a couple that you were working with in the book, where they don't even know what it is that they're longing for. And they have such a warped idea of what a like successful and fulfilling relationship even looks like.
He has sort of been taught not to care, to just be like sort of too cool to care.
Yeah, I think you see that a lot too.
Yeah. And so anything that his wife cares about, he kind of, just sort of says like, oh, you're making too big a deal of it. You're obsessing. What we find out, right, through this couples therapy is that he really deeply cares too. Yeah. But he's so afraid of caring because if something doesn't work out, he'll look bad. In this case, we were talking about it, like putting on a really nice party that they were throwing. And, he also wasn't completely wrong, because in part she was, I wouldn't say obsessing, but she was caring more than she might have, because there was such pressure on her to perform femininity and be this perfect woman. Yeah. So getting to all of those underlying dynamics helped this couple become really, functioning people, like having a functioning relationship, and also being, good role models for their kids.
Yeah, definitely. And to see both sides. And I feel like for kids, like young boys, to be able to be made aware of some of those things while they're happening, while they're growing up, you're just nipping it right in the bud.
And I would say that, like, it's sometimes they can hear it more from their dads, because coming from their moms, it can sound offensive. Like if you're saying women aren't treated well.
Yeah.
There are, of course, much more subtle ways that we can do this, but, coming from a dad, I think it can be really powerful. So for any dads listening.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I love that you talk a lot about creating like media literacy and like teaching your kids how to look at the world critically so they can kind of come to some of these conclusions on their own. And then you're giving them these tools to then, when you're not around to explain things, to be able to look at that and be like, I think that's that thing that me and my mom are talking about. Feeling a lot the same. Can you talk a little bit about what that might look like in everyday life for boys or girls? Like if you're watching TV together or...
Yeah, I think the media is a great place to start using teachable moments, right? And I say throughout the book that it's important to talk directly about sexism to kids, but that can feel really tricky because we worry about, shaming boys, and we worry about making girls, feel like the world isn't fair, or develop feelings of fear and inferiority before they feel that way. And yet we have to do it. So how do we do it? And I say, like, teachable moments are ways that you can make it more palatable. So yeah, like you said, watching TV. When you're watching a show with younger kids, you can point out, for example, that female characters often use magic to solve problems, while male characters use science or their physicality, right? So you might say something like, they make it seem like girls in real life can't solve problems because they don't have magic, but that's silly. We know girls are also clever, good at science, fast on their feet, whatever, right?
Yeah.
You can point out how much focus is put on girls' appearance and weight, but not on boys, which, by the way, is also true among animated characters, if you can believe it.
Yeah.
And, you want to talk to them about the flawless images that they see on TV and social media just aren't real, right? They're the result of a team of stylists, heavy makeup and filters. And you know what? Even teenage girls need this reminder.
Yeah. Because now more than ever.
Yes, but but here's the thing. Research shows that they can recognize that celebrities are heavily edited, but that awareness fades when it comes to comparing themselves to their peers.
Of course.
Right? Like in those moments, they forget that Snapchat's smooth, soft skin filter was used, or that an influencer's effortless look took hours to create. When I was younger and we were like flipping through magazines, which like we didn't have 24/7 access to, right?
Right.
They were celebrities we were looking at. Apparently it wasn't as destructive as it is for kids now who are looking at, people that are peers or seem like peers.
Totally. And I feel like even like, you watch a movie back from like the 90s or whatever, and everyone looked so individual, even if it was someone like, a Julia Roberts that is stunningly beautiful. But, she had her big hair that did show frizz. Like you saw movement in her face, and everyone didn't have perfect teeth. Like everyone looks so similar now because of also the like cosmetic procedures that people are getting. So that's like a whole other layer. But let's talk a little bit about this internet world that we are living in, because I think that is one of the scariest things, rightfully so, for parents, whether it's, parents of girls that understand the repercussions to their self-esteem or feeling left out, or boys, maybe finding these streams of like incel culture or learning about sex from the internet, and all of those ideas. So I guess similar to the conversations that you would have about a TV show, what are these conversations that you're having about social media?
So, sort of is your question about like how to
have these conversations with your kids, because it's like, even if you limit the social media, they might go to their friend's house and make an account on their computer, or, like, we can limit it, but
yeah, right. We want to mentor them, but
yeah,
not
people be kids, they'll find a way.
yeah, right. Like it's more about mentoring than it is about monitoring.
Yeah, I like that.
Because at some point, right, they're going to either be doing it at their friend's house, or they're going to have a Finsta,
Yeah.
or they're going to go away to college, and they need to have that kind of understanding of the internet and that self-control. So you're doing a lot of mentoring, right?
Yeah.
And I think with girls specifically who are on social media more than boys are, you want to get them thinking really critically about the culture and about what they're seeing and tuning into their feelings, right? So, when they're younger, you can be scrolling with them and ask them like, well, how does that account make you feel? And you can be really honest with them that research shows that the more girls are on social media, the more depressed they get, right? So you're asking them to tune into their bodies to see how they feel. And can they stop following an account if they don't like how they feel? And if it's a friend, it might, the social consequences might be too high, but maybe they
can also mute.
What'd you say?
You can mute an account.
You can mute.
So it doesn't look like
that's a good point. Yes. Yeah. Right. But they can also, start massaging the algorithm a little bit by following like body positive accounts, right?
Yeah.
Like, just put in hashtag self-love or, something like that, so that, and teach them about how much the algorithm is sort of honing in on their vulnerabilities, right? Yeah. So like if they pause over, like skin treatment or acne medication or lose, something to lose weight, the algorithm is like, she is ripe for advertising right now. Like teenagers do not like to be manipulated. So talk to them about being manipulated by these algorithms and have them, you want them and they will want to feel more in control of what they're fed.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I love that you bring that up. Would you also recommend kind of having similar conversations about that industry, like the beauty, the wellness industry as a whole, and how all of these trends that we see or these ads on social media, like the crux of it really is to create and hone in on insecurities?
God, yes. I mean, that's right. I mean, we want them to know, right, that so much of what so many of the messages they're getting is about making a profit, right? And so they are going to be, girls are picked apart, right? Body part by body part by body part. So the more flaws they believe they have, the more they're going to feel they have to fix them. And the more, these companies and these advertisements happen to have the perfect solution for them. And so the more, so you want over time to talk to your kids about like, it is a feat to love your body, right? Like, and the world is going to tell you your body is the enemy. The real battle is anything that makes you feel less love and less respect for your body.
I love that so much of the things that you're saying across so many different topics, like really narrows down to helping your kids be in tune with what they are feeling and how things make them feel. And especially for girls, like that, I don't know why or how, and that's probably a whole other separate conversation, but like you're really helping them to create that trust in their gut instincts. And that's something that just dissipates so fast and is so encouraged to like stop at such a young age.
Because if they don't trust themselves, I mean, there's a couple things that I want to say, right? Like we want them to tune into themselves, but we also want them to become critical consumers of the culture, because if they know, because then they will know that they are not broken, the culture is broken, right? And they're going to be told over and over again that they're broken. So if they can tune into their feelings, they can also protect themselves, not just from beauty culture and diet culture, but from, this gets to what you're saying, trust in their gut. When something feels wrong or inappropriate in the way that they're treated.
Yeah. Which, I mean, we see that in so many ways, like slowly being chipped away at, whether it's, being forced to give hugs to your creepy uncle that you don't want to, or, all of those things. So let's dig into that actually a little bit. Like, how can we start to teach our kids about consent and bodily autonomy and all of those things? And like, how early do you start doing that?
I think you start extremely early. I think you can actually, might sound surprising, but you can start from birth, right? You can start before they're even verbal, giving them cues. I'm going to pick you up now. I'm going to put you in this nice warm bath now, right? And then as they get a little bit older, you're really teaching them that their body is theirs and theirs alone.
Yeah. No, it's all good. It is all good. We can edit out any pauses, so it's no worries.
Yeah. So we were talking about consent.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah. So you asked, how can you teach them, right?
Yeah.
Well, okay. So part of, so you're teaching them so much about consent. You're teaching them about bodily autonomy. And you're teaching them that, I guess what I was wanting to say is that girls learn from such a young age to ignore so much, right?
Yeah.
There's so much unwanted touch that happens, right? Whether it's, being forced to hug your creepy uncle, like you were saying, or which happens like a lot. I swear everybody has a creepy uncle.
Yeah, for sure. Statistically also, like,
what was that?
So statistically also, like,
yes.
Yikes.
And or if you're supposed to, or they're being tickled or they're being pulled into uninvited hugs. And then as they get older, it's shoulder rubs or, a hand on the thigh, or they're having their, back touched because someone is just innocently passing by. Right. And so they learn to ignore so much that they grow up not actually knowing who their bodies belong to, what's okay, and when it's time to speak up. Right. So all along the way, you're teaching them that their body is theirs and theirs alone, which is why you want to give them a lot of choice, even from the time they're very young.
Yeah. And I feel like there was a line a couple of times about this where like you're teaching consent and you're teaching them to be confident and have a voice and all of this. But like sometimes you also do have to be the parent and be like, no, you have to do this because like it's for your safety or whatever. And reminding them that like, I understand this is making you feel X, but I also am your parent and it's my job to make sure that you are safe or something along those lines. And I feel like that's so powerful too, because they also need that reassurance, also that you're looking out for them.
Yeah, right. And that you are, right, exactly, that you're a parent, you're an adult, so sometimes you do know better, but also there are only certain adults that know better, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's huge.
And you're teaching them about who your safe adults are. The other thing is that we're also teaching consent, speaking up, just by helping them have like strong voices, right? And often we shut girls down. We don't, even inadvertently, like we say we want our kids to have strong voices, then we have trouble tolerating anger and opinions from girls because it's not what we were taught to expect from girls. It's not what we were allowed to have as girls, right? And so when girls don't feel entitled to things like speaking up or being treated with respect, it makes it hard for them to protect themselves.
Yeah.
And what I found is that it's a really slippery slope from gender bias and sexism, which is like all the internalizing kids are doing about their, girls are doing about their sex. It's a slippery slope from that to sexual harassment and assault, right? So like there's a story in the book, which you'll probably remember because it's kind of a meaningful one, right?
Yeah.
About Elena. And what she said about sexual harassment was like, what's the point of getting upset? It's always going to happen and you have to get on with your life. And I hear that from so many girls.
Yeah.
Like it just fuels the fire. What's the point? So, that's how they start disconnecting from their bodies. Right. And like what happens when girls don't have someone in their corner teaching them that their body is theirs and theirs alone? Or what happens when they don't have really good support after being harassed or assaulted?
Yeah.
They blame themselves. So in this case, Elena couldn't recognize that she was assaulted by a man in a car on her way home from school. Instead, she wondered, what is it about me that made the man slow down, grab my arm, twist it, and sniff it? Was it because I was wearing perfume?
Yeah.
And honestly, that story can make me cry every time I tell it, because it's like too many girls blame themselves because they've been taught that they are supposed to,
Yeah. I mean, you talk about so much of this in the book that not to bring it dark, but I do just have to say that, like, also being someone reading this who doesn't yet have kids, I still found it like extremely healing for myself because I have some sexual trauma and most girls have experienced some level of that violation. And just everything that you wrote about these little tiny things that just chip away over time and create this self-blame and this shame, like, was incredibly healing to read about because it just helps you understand the world that you grew up in so much more.
I mean, I get like dozens of emails and calls, of people saying like it was so healing and liberating for me, which was kind of my secret hope. I mean, it was healing and liberating for me to
Of
write
course.
it. And what you're talking about are those tiny psychological paper cuts that accumulate and become festering wounds of self-doubt. Right. And so that's why when girls say things like, oh, it's just going to happen, like whether it's a PMS joke about your mood or, a strap snapped, like all of these things, they add up to just degrade you and demean you and make you feel less than.
Yeah.
Girls, like if you are telling them that that's not okay, eventually they're going to realize, like when it does happen to them, they won't be like, I'm so weak, I have to grow a thicker skin, right? What they realize is that these things are offensive and intrusive, and I shouldn't have to put up with it.
Right. Not okay. Like, I feel like so often we're taught to absorb very poor behavior from men specifically, and taught to blame ourselves, whether it's from school dress codes or like, all right, listen to this. When I was in college, 2010 to 2014 at UNH, they have since changed the rule, but I'm still going to call them out. We were not allowed to wear tank tops to the gym because too many boys had been harassing girls. So instead of punishing the boys, boys were allowed to wear tank tops. We weren't allowed to wear tank tops.
To the gym.
To the gym in college. How crazy is that?
Wow.
Crazy.
Talk about rape culture, right?
Yeah. No kidding. No kidding. But anyways, back to the kids. So I also really, really loved the conversation that you laid out. I can't remember if it was that same story or another one where the girl actually ends up coming to her parents and talking about this sexual assault.
She does, yeah.
And how would you advise parents to manage that conversation without inadvertently putting that shame and that guilt on her?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? Because it's always a shock if a child comes to their parent. So the first thing I would say is just listen. Listen without interrupting, letting her talk, attending to her feelings first, right? Even well-meaning questions can sound like disbelief, right? And many girls already blame and doubt themselves. Right? So immediate validation goes a really long way. Like, tell her you're sorry this happened and that you'd like to help in any way that you can, right? So you're wanting to stay calm and steady, even though internally you may be feeling shock, anger, even blame. Right? Like maybe they broke a rule, like sneaking out or going to a party that you said no to. And that's when it happened, right? They still didn't deserve to be hurt.
Yeah.
Any tendency, but it can be normal for a parent to have this sort of tendency to
be like, that's why I have that rule. Like,
right. Or
you're just trying to protect
clothes they wore or whatever, right? But it's just their way of trying to control the situation. Yeah. Like maybe this won't happen again, or maybe we could have stopped this, or if they just listened to me, everybody would have been fine.
Yeah. No, I really love that, and I mean, all of these conversations that you lay out throughout the book, you really break them down in such a great way to follow. I also really liked how you lay out these conversations to have with young girls and even boys too. In teaching about consent and everything, is how to recognize, one, the difference between flirting and harassment, but also more importantly, even how to recognize the qualities of someone that you want to be in a relationship with or have sex with, because that's one thing that I feel like as a society, we are missing as a whole. Like, I was watching some true crime documentary and it was talking about how the leading cause of death for pregnant and postpartum women is homicide at the hands of their partner. I'm like, this is literally life and death. Why are we not teaching girls so far past just like, get married, find someone that loves you and gives you butterflies? Like, why are we not teaching them
Yeah. I mean,
what values to look for? What are the signs, you know? Yeah, that wasn't
literally
really
one in three girls will experience dating violence, physical, you know, or otherwise. Like,
that's
so we
staggering.
absolutely have to teach them about respectful relationships.
Definitely. And is that kind of, you know, similar to those other conversations that you're having about looking at the world critically and looking at instances along the way critically?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yes. I mean, you know, the more you can be in a relationship with a partner where that's modeled, the better.
Yeah, of course.
But there are so many ways to teach them about respectful relationships. And I think what you were getting at before about flirting and harassment and sex is like reading nonverbal cues, right? And being able, and you know, you can, when kids are little, especially, you can sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, not role model it, but
Like role play a little bit?
role play.
Yeah. Monday morning, words are hard. We're doing our best.
Words are hard. So you can role play a little bit, right? By talking about, boy asking a girl, like, can I hold your hand? I guess. And she looks down and puts her hand behind her back, you know, and so you're sort of saying, what do you think she really wants to hold your hand? What might she have done if she wanted to hold your hand? You know, so
yes. And that's also teaching boys about like empty consent and this huge thing where like a lot of times, especially, you know, younger boys that they're just like learning about sex and everything, they might not realize that they did something wrong. And then of course, there are a lot of people that do, but that's such an important thing that I think a lot of people just miss. Because they're afraid to have this uncomfortable conversation.
Yes.
Yeah. I loved all the chapters about sex and sex ed and sex talks. And I loved the example of the like pizza party.
Oh, yeah, sex and pizza.
Where basically like the school brings in the parents and they watch this video and ask questions and everything. And obviously now, more frustratingly, so many more states are probably very much not open to stuff like this since they're not even open to proper sex education in schools. But is this something that like you would even recommend like a group of parents and kids could do like in a nice, like safe, trusting environment?
Well, yeah. So sex and pizza was something that happened at my kids' school, right? That was sort of the informal name for it. So it sounds bad, but what it was the school invited parents to come in and they served pizza and they had them come in to talk about sex or to sort of get the conversation about sex started so that it wouldn't be something to be ashamed of in the home. And yeah, they would show a video and then they had a nurse that answered anonymous questions from the kids. And then the parents and the kids, you know, would huddle together in families and answer questions about like, when do you think it's okay to date and stuff like that. So I think that if your school's not doing it, it is something you can create. But part of why it worked was the anonymity of it, that kids could ask anything. And then the parents could be aware of like, oh, kids really don't know, like, if my period comes out the same hole as my pee. Very basic questions. I mean, another really amazing part of it was the parents anonymously gave letters that described what it was like for them when they were going through puberty or when they were at this time in their life. And the teachers would read it out anonymously. And so the kids could be like, oh, the parents can relate because they've been through this too. So it really opened up these channels. So I think, you know, it's a program that could work, but it needs to be multiple families.
Totally. No, I just love that. I mean, I think, like you say in the book, statistically, if you look at the research, like you can brought a lot of comparisons to how like Dutch culture handles sex and sex education. but we know that it leads to less sexual violence, less teen pregnancies, less stigma. So it is so infuriating that.
I mean, it's crazy, right? Like the Dutch, they normalize bodies and human sexuality from birth. But in the United States, right, these topics are like loaded with shame and stereotypes, right? Dutch parents have conversations with their children about sex, gender, power, autonomy, diversity, consent throughout their entire lives, right? And here's the thing, the Dutch have fewer teenage pregnancies. Like they're so open about sex. They have fewer teenage pregnancies, abortions, and STIs than almost any other country. Meanwhile, the United States has the highest rates of teen pregnancy, births, and abortions of literally any industrialized nation. So it's like, what lessons is the U.S. not learning?
Yeah, totally. I mean, how can you look at those numbers and not instantly have so much curiosity around it?
And I think this statistic would convince parents how important it is to talk to your kids openly about sex and pleasure, right? American women say that their early sexual experiences were driven by hormones or boyfriends who were in charge, while the Dutch women pointed to love and commitment as the most important reason for their first intercourse.
Yeah, I mean, and I think you talk about a lot of this in the book again, but it mirrored so many of my friends' experiences, like people that I know had such similar experiences, because I think it is so common, where girls are confused because they technically gave consent, but they know that it didn't feel good physically or emotionally, and are left with so much shame and confusion.
Yeah.
But I want you to talk a little bit about actually the conversations that parents can have with their daughter specifically about sex. Like, I'd love the example of when I can't find it exactly in my notes, but about when this daughter is like thinking about wanting to have sex for the first time. And of course, as a parent, it's like you want to protect and control the behavior and be like, no, 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 you are not ready, and just shut it down, when like we know teenagers will find a way. They will find a car, that you'll be at work, whatever. Like, it's going to happen probably. So how can you make sure it happens in a way where your child is respected and they have a positive, safe experience? I think the quote was helping her think critically of her choices, not controlling them, which just like,
I know.
It creates such a safe space for the parents. So expand a little bit on that. Like, how can that conversation?
I think controlling their experience, I think it does go for everything. I think I was talking about it at the time in terms of like sexy clothing.
Yes.
I think parents have to really understand that the confusing messages girls get about sex creates this kind of circus around their sexuality. Right. And so it can paralyze them in deciding whether and when to have sex.
Yeah.
Like, they're getting these messages: be sexy, but don't have sex. Save yourself, but don't be a tease. Sex is proof you're desirable, but boys are only using you. So
how do you win?
Yes, right. Their personal desire and decision-making are just clouded by the meaning that others will make it. Right. And so like you were talking about empty consent. I have countless stories from girls about saying yes because they worried about being labeled prude, or because they thought they had to have sex to get what they wanted emotionally, or they said yes to sex to avoid the awkwardness of rejecting someone. Right? As if not hurting someone is worth more than their dignity. Right? And so all of this ties into giving girls a healthy sense of entitlement. Right? Like, they are entitled to say no. They are entitled to weigh how they feel and their comfort over somebody else's. Yeah. Right. So how they're going to eventually approach sex is all about how much personhood you allow them in your home, and how much you protect them from the people trying to tear down their personhood outside the home. But then when it comes to having sex, right, I think there's all kinds of ways that you can talk to them about that sex should be pleasurable, that you would like them to wait until it's meaningful, but being very careful not to shame them for their longings, right? Like, they need to hear about the risks of partnered sex. But they also need to hear that most partner sex isn't about reproduction, but about the pursuit of emotional and physical pleasure. Yeah. Right? Telling kids otherwise is dishonest, and they know it. right? That's why they keep doing it despite
Yeah.
pledges to wait until marriage or warnings it could ruin their life and ruin their reputation. So even stressing that sex only happens between two people who love each other can be confusing.
I
Right.
loved that part of the book.
Right?
You explain like how that's confusing, how that can kind of like muddy the waters.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think we want our daughters confusing lust and infatuation with love, right? I don't want my daughter to think that if someone agrees to have sex with her, it's because they love her, or that she has to have sex with someone because she loves them.
Yeah.
Right? So sex and love do not always go together. We can talk about how that can often be the most incredible and enlightening and spiritual sex.
Yeah.
But it isn't true that that's the only reason people have sex.
Yeah. And even just sharing like, that's what I would like for you because of all of these good things about that. Not saying that's the only time that it happens, because that is so confusing.
By saying sex feels good, we validate their longings rather than drive those longings and that part of them underground where they risk being kept secret, not just from us, but also from them too.
Yeah.
We want our kids to be safe, and we want them to grow up to be adults with vibrant, intimate, healthy sex lives.
Of course. And I mean, think about how many women are literally suppressing their own sexuality or having like horrible sex into their like adulthood.
It's
because
very sad. Yes.
yeah, because they never learned how to speak up for themselves or even what they like or that that's even an option.
I like to say if girls feel good in and about their bodies and believe that their own pleasure is important, they'll be able to identify when something feels bad, wrong, or inappropriate and trust their concerns, whether it's a sexual concern or some other concern about sexism, are worthwhile.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we are like at time. But I also really loved these instances that you lay out for ways to build that voice and that confidence and that autonomy in your home on like an everyday basis. Like some of the negotiation opportunities of like, if your kid wants something, all right, make a PowerPoint presentation. Like you're practicing your communication skills, you're learning how to negotiate properly, but you're also like, I feel like almost most importantly, teaching your kids to like recognize what it is that they want and why. Right. And even that's something that a lot of girls are just taught from the beginning that like, actually what you want doesn't matter. So you're not going to know about it.
Exactly. I mean, even if you know, like I tell parents, even if you know your answer in advance, right? Like to the question of, can I have a puppy or can I have that an ice cream cone, right? She, like, if you have her write a paragraph about why she wants that sleepover or, PowerPoint presentation for the puppy or a mental health day or whatever it is, if you know your answer in advance, she's learning what's important to her and developing effective communication skills, right? She's becoming an authority on what she wants and why.
Love it. Okay, so let's end it with two quick things. One, if there's something that you could tell your younger self, what would that be? I'm sure lots of things, but
it would, I think it would be trust your gut, right? I think that we know on a cellular level or a brain level, like when something isn't right, our amygdala gets activated, the fight or flight gets activated. Like, listen to that. Know that if you're sensing something is off, it probably is.
That's huge. Huge. And any last like overarching messages that you want to send to parents right now out here in this scary world?
I think it is scary, but I think that we can really make a difference in our girls' lives. I see it all the time. I've seen it with my own daughter, that we are able to bring an understanding of bias and sexism into their lives so that they don't internalize it when they go out into the world. And that starts with us recognizing our own biases.
Yeah.
And practicing what I call our parenting, right? And that does not stand for rest and relaxation. Now I know
if only
most of us can use that. It stands for recognized gender bias parenting and replace it with empowering strategies. And the bonus R is repair. When you recognize and replace and talk to your kid about it, you are repairing your relationship. And I have a great R&R parenting story, but I don't know if we have time for it.
I have time for it if you
All
have.
right, then I have time for
Okay.
it. Okay, just a really quick story is I had a woman write to me as she was reading Sexism and Sensibility. And she said, oh my God, I identify as a feminist. I am very progressive. I want my daughter to have a strong voice, but I think I am shutting down her strong opinions. And she said, even though my son is the more outspoken and critical one. And so she went to her daughter and said, I think I'm doing this. And her daughter started to cry from the
Oh,
recognition.
no.
Right.
That's
And
all
so
it
this is
takes.
mom. She just had trouble tolerating something that didn't look like, the version of femininity that she had swallowed
Yeah.
her whole life.
Totally. And I mean, that's got to be just so common. Also, I mean, we're also just humans living on the world for the first time, whether you're a parent or not. And we're still just trying to figure it out and break down these like generational cycles, also.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like giving yourself some grace to figure that out and doing your best.
Yeah. And I mean, I did not set out to write a parenting book. I think so many parenting books are shaming or make you feel like, oh, I could be doing more. I don't do enough. And like moms, especially if you're listening, you're doing enough. You're doing more than enough.
Yeah.
This is just like, here's something you can add in over time and you're never going to fail because there's always other, instances to make up for it too. So it was like, I actually started out writing this book for teenage girls, but I
Wow.
realized, okay, most teenagers aren't reading cultural criticism. And
Yeah.
even
For
though
sure.
it is full of stories and I hear it's actually like a pretty engaging read,
It is.
it's hard to get them to read that. And so I was like, well, the next best line of defense are their parents. And so that was why I wrote a parenting book. But I was really, really careful to make sure, like, there's no shaming. I make mistakes all of the time and I do what I can to repair them.
No, I think you did that really well of hammering home that like you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to get it right every time, but can you push past your own discomfort to look at yourself critically and just have uncomfortable conversations? Like that's really all it is when you boil it down.
Yeah. And I mean, that was one of the reasons why I gave a lot of, like the little paragraphs with arrows or the how do you do this?
So helpful. So you really wasn't like, oh my God, I just read this chapter and now I have to like analyze the whole thing and figure out how I'm going to put this into my real life. Like you really do make it very digestible with like action steps and everyday scenarios. And I also love that you put that emphasis on recognizing this perfection that moms feel like they have to achieve and how actually you should take that off the table and take that pressure off because your daughter's watching that pursuit of perfection also isn't great for them. So like,
right. We don't
pressure
want
off.
them to grow up with that need for perfection and that sense of like of being the ultimate caregiver who sacrifices herself, right? We're wanting to raise daughters who have strong senses of self because it feels better to be in the world that way, because it makes for better relationships and because you can protect yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, where can people find you? Where can they buy this book?
They can buy this book anywhere books are sold. It's also on audiobook that I read. And so if you've liked my voice, you could go that way. If you haven't, get the hard copy. And it's on Kindle, and you can find more about me at joannefinkelstein.com. I'm also on Instagram and TikTok at joannefinkelstein.
Love it. Well, thank you again so much. This was amazing. So appreciative of your work. So
Thank you.
thank you for sharing.